My name's Mark Littlewood. I will be chairing proceedings over the next hour. Let me just set the scene before I introduce our stunning panel of speakers. I guess what led quite a large number of free marketeers to support leaving the European Union was the chance, the opportunity, by no means the guarantee, but the chance and the opportunity to increase our free trade links with the 80% of the world's economy and the 95% of the world's population who aren't part of the EU single market. And the Asia-Pacific region is a huge and growing part of the world economy. The benefits of open trade and economic freedom have seen large swathes of Asia become economic powerhouses since the end of the Second World War, and this trend seems set to continue. How can Britain best take advantage of what this region has to offer? Should we focus on bilateral arrangements, or instead on joining larger regional groups, such as the inelegantly named CPTPP, or should we pursue a joint strategy, go for both? And what could the opportunities mean for us here back in the United Kingdom in terms of growing the economy, bouncing back from COVID and growing business? If you're tweeting during the event, please use the hashtag ThinkTent. Do be aware that we are filming this. It's not going out live on YouTube, but it will go out on the IEA London YouTube channel in a few days' time. Let me introduce our panellists in the order in which I'm going to ask them to speak, and I'm going to ask for their opening observations and thoughts in 5 minutes, please. I'm not a particularly dictatorial chairman, so I'll just gently tap a glass when you get to about 5.5 minutes, tap it rather more loudly when we get to 6, and break the glass when we get to 7, right, as to give you an indication. Speaking first will be Shanker Singham. On my far right, he is the CEO of Competere, a trade law and economic policy consultancy, and chairman of the Competere Foundation for Trade and Competition Policy, and one of the world's leading trade experts. He has advised governments and multinationals on international trade, competition and regulatory issues for 3 decades. He's a member of the Advisory Council of Wilton Park, of the Bretton Woods Committee and the US Council on Foreign Relations. Most importantly of all, he is an academic fellow at the Institute of Economic Affairs, was a member also of the Department of International Trade and Agriculture Commission, serves as an advisor on the DIT's Technical Working Group on TBT issues, and has authored numerous pamphlets and books, including the IEA paper Eastern Promises, Assessing the Future of UK-India Trade, which is available for free on our website. Second, on my immediate left, we have Aniskha Jelicich. She leads the Government and Industry Relations team for Pernod Ricard's 3 UK-based entities, Chivas Brothers, the Scotch whisky business, Global Travel Retail, and Pernod Ricard UK, its UK wines and spirits distribution business. She joined Pernod Ricard in 2010, has served as an advisor in the New Zealand Parliament to 2 government ministers, and worked for the New Zealand Treasury and New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I owe Aniskha not just the thanks for being here, but my thanks through you to Pernod Ricard for generously sponsoring this event. Thank you very much indeed. On my immediate right is His Excellency George Brandis, QC. He has had a distinguished career in law and politics in Australia. A barrister by profession, he served as a senator in the Australian Parliament for 18 years, was a minister in the governments of John Howard, Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull. His ministerial appointments included Minister for the Arts, Attorney General, Vice President of the Executive Council and Leader of the Government in the Senate. As Attorney General, he was responsible for the reform of Australia's espionage and foreign interference laws and played a leading role in the introduction of marriage equality in 2017. And last, but by no means least, on my far left is Lord Bilimoria, the President of the Confederation of British Industry, who has decades of experience in the world of business and entrepreneurship. He is the founder of Cobra Beer, Chairman of the Cobra Beer Partnership Limited, and Chairman of Molson Coors Cobra India. He is also involved in strengthening UK-India trade and investment ties as the Chairman of the UK-India Business Council, and a founding member of the of the Prime Minister of India's Global Advisory Council. He's a qualified chartered accountant with Ernst & Young and graduated in law from the University of Cambridge. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to our 4 panellists. So I'm going to ask you to set the scene, then I will ask a few questions of each of you, and then obviously we'll come over to the floor for questions too. So Shanker, your 5 minutes start now.
Okay, thanks very much. It's very good to be speaking back at the IEA. What I'll do is, as those of you who've read any of our papers will know, we tend to look at these things in terms of different sort of trade policy in different pillars. And I'll go through each of them and sort of give a sort of scorecard of how the UK, I think the UK is doing, and put the Indo-Pacific issues, the tilt, in a sort of wider context. So unilaterally, obviously we've now got the global tariff, the UK tariff schedule. The regulatory reform agenda is the crucial thing here. It's important not only for our domestic position and how well our economy is doing, but it's also incredibly important in terms of our external trade policy. So we are contemplating, or we are in the accession process for the CPTPP, as Mark mentioned. Well, our domestic regulatory settings will have a huge effect on how that accession process goes. Similarly, our negotiations with Australia, New Zealand, and to the extent that we are in negotiations with the US, they will be profoundly affected by our domestic regulatory choices. So that matters, not just for trade policy, but obviously it matters in terms of your own market. Bilaterally, obviously the Australia-New Zealand deals are going, I think, relatively well. Hopefully will be concluded, very soon. There is one agreement that we have started to push, where I think actually the UK has an opportunity to do a deal that very few other people can do, which is India. And I think, and we talked about this in Plan A Plus back in September of 2018, that there is a deal that is possible with India that involves the very focused offensive agenda the UK has, which is things like, we want legal services access, we want certain aspects of financial services access, and we want the all-important Scotch whisky tax reduced. But there are certain things that the UK would have to give on in terms of Mode 4 services, that sort of thing, movement of workers, that I think we can. And if we do all of that, and we also have a more open agricultural regime in terms of our sanitary and phytosanitary rules, that I think actually that deal with India could happen, and very few countries can actually do a deal with India at the moment. That's not to, any trade agreement with India is going to take a long time to do, but that is an opening that we have, and it's sort of it's part of that Indo-Pacific tilt that is very important. It also accommodates a little bit the fact that the US deal dynamics are not as they were, shall we say. We're probably not going to have a comprehensive trade deal with the US in the near future, and by near I mean in the next couple of years. But I think we can have smaller deals with the US in terms of things like mutual recognition and other areas where I think there's an opening. In terms of plurilateral agreements, which is possibly the more interesting part of this discussion, obviously you've got CPTPP, and the accession has started. The UK is the first accession member of the CPTPP agreement, first new member, and there are lots of countries that are lining up to accede to CPTPP. But increasingly, I think we used to think of CPTPP as the ceiling and the WTO as the floor. I think increasingly CPTPP is the floor, and things like AUKUS, the new arrangement with the US, UK and Australia, those types of agreements constitute the ceiling. The WTO is in the basement, which is not to say we forget about it, but it will be dragged, kicking and screaming into the future. But the AUKUS deal is incredibly important. It isn't just a submarine deal. There is a lot more to it than that. There are potential initiatives in cybersecurity, in other areas, and also in trade. And I think if you look at the major issue in international trade, which is how you deal with behind-the-border barriers and market distortions and so on, the UK, Australia, and the US have similar views on this. It may be the only thing the Biden administration is prepared to really talk about in the near-term future. And I think you're going to see more emphasis on that type of arrangement, and an attempt, I hope, to bring the Japanese into that as well. And then multilaterally, it's basically the UK pushing things like domestic regulation, services, plurilaterals, and those kind of things. But don't expect a huge improvement in the state of the WTO anytime soon. So I'll close with that as a sort of scene setter.
Shanker, thank you very much. Almost perfectly sticking to time. Aniskha, let me come to you next.
Thank you. We sit here today as a case study in trade. So Pernod Ricard produces 1/3 of its global strategic brands in the UK. Our footprint ranges from Orkney down to Plymouth. We export about £1 billion of Scotch whisky and gin every year to over 160 countries. So it will be no surprise to anybody here that we are excited about the possibilities to increase our trade with the fastest growing region in the globe. This presents the opportunity to set world-leading standards, trade agreements, and drive forward the UK growth. It's also the region that is recovering fastest from COVID, as our recent financial results would show, with 20% growth in countries like South Korea and India, and a massive 47% in China. It's all happening there. We are not alone in our interest in the region, but it's not all plain sailing. In countries, as you heard reference, like India, we face a tariff of 150% on our spirits. And we're not the only ones in the region who are doing business with our hands tied behind our back, from automobiles to pharma, IT to education. British businesses sometimes face an uphill battle to do business in countries in the Asia-Pacific region, which is why we welcome anything that strengthens trade ties in the region. We've seen some good steps. With the EU FTA rollovers were an essential precursor. And they set the boundary. We got the rollover, for example, of Vietnam, EU, South Korea. We're excited about the Australia FTA, which we think is imminent. We hope that New Zealand will follow very shortly on the footsteps. And from our point of view as a global company, that means not only better access for spirits, but it means that our wines from Australia and New Zealand can come here and compete the same tariff preferences as EU wine, therefore increasing the choice to British consumers. CPTPP offers an opportunity to smooth regulatory barriers in the region. So, for example, we could produce our products and bottle them in different locations. There's also the possibility, as Shanker referenced, of more countries acceding to CPTPP in the future, such as Thailand. But we want to go beyond FTAs. FTAs are fantastic, we love them, but they're not a silver bullet. What we need is a race to the top in standards. What we need is an ability to tackle state-level barriers as well. So, for example, in India, we face pricing restrictions, we face local monopolies, we face transportation and labelling requirements. So even an FTA with India will not address most of these issues. So we need deep and ongoing regulatory cooperation, the kind of patient diplomacy that takes many years on behalf of some of the people in this room. We also need to be aware that the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh. So you may get a tariff decrease and then find a sneaky excise tax increase in another country, as we're seeing with Vietnam that's now proposing specific excise tax increases. And we need the right policies here at home that set a framework for business. For example, when we challenged in 2017 trade barriers with Kenya and Canada, they came back and more or less said, well, look in your own backyard first, please. And we need business engagement with the government, with DIT, a continuing dialogue. We need ongoing trade committees, and we welcome the joint trade committees to that end. So for us, what we see in the Indo-Pacific tilt is very much a step in the right direction. Better access to the largest and fastest growing market, the opportunity to strike new and best practice trade agreements, frankly. and we hope to see more of them in the future. Thank you.
You stuck brilliantly to time. Thank you, Aniskha. George, the floor's yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. So, to begin at the beginning, Australia welcomes the Indo-Pacific tilt, and it welcomes the integrated review. One of the most important insights in the integrated review was the appreciation of the very close alignment between Britain's strategic interests and its trade policy interests. Now that might seem an almost obvious thing to say until you reflect that until Brexit, Britain didn't have a trade policy and hadn't had a trade policy for 50 years. So the rediscovery or the regeneration of a UK trade policy is important in itself, but then making the intellectual link between Britain as a global trading nation and Britain as a nation with newly defined and more widely defined global strategic interests is an extremely important breakthrough in thinking, and a very beneficial one. And I think the fact that you've described today's seminar, in fact, as the trade policy tilt, adopting the language of the integrated review, sort of it itself reflects an acknowledgement of that intellectual breakthrough. Now, I want to use my remarks to give a bit of context to the Australia-UK FTA, because, and you know, I think the conclusion is imminent. Australia's Trade Minister, Dan Tehan, is arriving in the United Kingdom next week, and we hope that the last outstanding issues will be nailed down then, when he has his first face-to-face meeting with the new International Trade Secretary. But whether it is next week or in weeks to come, the FTA with Australia, and I see my friend Bede Corrie, the New Zealand High Commissioner here, hello Bede, with New Zealand as well, do seem to be at the top of the queue for the first new UK trade agreements. So the Australian deal is important symbolically because it's the first, but it's also important because it is a very ambitious agreement. It's a zero for zero agreement, zero quotas, zero tariffs, at the end state with some transition periods of sensitive commodities, and other elements that have been added on us, particularly about mobility of persons, youth mobility, professional recognition and so on, which, as it were, sweeten the deal in, particularly for the populations of our two countries that are not necessarily going to be immediately affected by the trade benefits in a tangible way, but will see real advantages for themselves and the opportunity to live and work and study in each other's countries. So it's important for that reason. It's important as well because it is the natural and necessary stepping stone into the CPTPP, which, as you all know, is a much, much, much bigger deal. But thirdly, and this is the main point I want to emphasise, it's important as well in the strategic context. And it was very interesting when she spoke to conference on Sunday afternoon that Liz Truss, who I've come to know very well in her former capacity as the International Trade Secretary and who I'm delighted to see is now the Foreign Secretary, in her first set-piece speech to Tory conference as Foreign Secretary, emphasised the very, very close relationship between Britain's strategic policy and Britain's trade policy. And she actually referenced AUKUS, the Australia-UK-US deal, to illustrate that point. Now, as we all agree, and as almost everybody who's raised the subject with me in the last 48 hours has been very eager to tell me, AUKUS is extremely important. It's extremely important, as Shanker said, not merely because it's about one particular type of weapon system, submarines. It provides a framework of cooperation which has two particular features. First of all, it's a framework that could only exist between countries that are extremely like-minded and extremely mutually trusting. And secondly, it creates a framework which is bound to last. And so it is a long-term agreement. It's not a treaty, it's a strategic partnership. But it creates, just as Australia entered into the ANZUS Treaty with the United States and New Zealand in 1951, which this year celebrates its 70th anniversary. This is a framework that is bound to last for a very long time. And it will necessarily, therefore, impose upon all three of its members a greater alignment and a greater degree of cooperation, which is a good thing. So perhaps I should stop at this point. Was that my first bill?
There's your first bell.
My first bill.
A couple of sentences.
Let me wind up with that observation, with these observations. The alignment of trade policy and strategic interests, which has always been important, has never been more important and never better recognised by the United Kingdom in our lifetimes than it is now. When it comes to the Indo-Pacific, and particularly the relationship between the United Kingdom and Australia, the AUKUS agreement is a lasting agreement which will impose a discipline for close and lasting cooperation. And both of those, from Australia's point of view, are very good things.
George, thank you very much indeed. And last but by no means least, my lord, your 5 minutes begin now.
Thank you very much, and great to be with the IA, and thank you, Pernod Ricard, for your sponsorship. The Indo-Pacific, I mean, this is the main thing. We always used to talk about the Asia-Pacific, and the integrated review very clearly says it's no longer the Asia-Pacific, it's a tilt to the Indo-Pacific. And I was born and brought up in India, and I'm the founding chairman of the UK-India Business Council. And India, of course, now is, since 1991, when it started liberalizing, is now an emerging global economic superpower, 1.4 billion people, the world's largest democracy, over half the population of the Commonwealth, fifth largest economy in the world. We are now, the UK, the sixth largest economy in the world. And we've now said we're going to have an enhanced trade partnership that's been agreed with India to double the bilateral trade between the two countries from the existing level of 24 billion to 50 billion by 2030. And let's put that into context. The 24 billion is just a little bit higher than the bilateral trade that we do with Australia, which is at about 22 billion. Let me put this into further context. The whole of the Commonwealth, over 50 countries, makes up less than 10% of the UK's trade. So the potential is absolutely huge. We've started work on a UK-India free trade agreement now. The free trade agreement, which the CBI, for example, which I'm proud to be president, we put in our submission along with many others, which includes tariffs, standards and regulations, climate, mobility, data, procurement. So very comprehensive. And we think that India is a huge consumer market, edtech, fintech is booming over there, but there are the issues. And Aniskha's highlighted, for example, Scotch whisky, 150%. Automobiles, huge duties. Foreign lawyers, British lawyers, some of the best lawyers in the world, are not allowed to practice in India as things stand. Foreign universities, we have the best universities in the world, along with the United States of America and Australia and New Zealand, of course, and that our universities cannot open up in India as things stand. Good news, India has now announced that foreign universities will soon be allowed to open up in India. And I'm proud to be Chancellor of the University of Birmingham, one of the largest universities in the UK, Russell Group University, top 100 of the world. We are, as we speak, brand new, AI-enabled, super-duper, ultra-modern campus that's opened in Dubai. Now, just imagine if India allows us, will be one of the first universities in the queue to open up in India. And of course, a lot of Indian students will be going to the Dubai campus at the moment. So the UK, well, there are many things this tiny little country, 1% of the world's population, is very good at. We're the second largest recipient of inward investment, but we're also the second largest exporter of services. We used to be laughed at when it came to entrepreneurship in the 1980s. Today, we're held up as one of the most entrepreneurial countries in the world. And when it comes to green industrial revolution, when it comes to fintech, we are leaders. The integrated review, and here it's quite important, it's so good that we've had an integrated review of security. His Excellency has spoken about the link between security and trade. So here we've got security, defense, development, and foreign policy all in one document, and with this tilt toward the Indo-Pacific. The CPTPP, the Australia deal, is super important in itself, and congratulations to the High Commissioner and the team in Australia and Trade Minister. I've seen this firsthand. 365 days to negotiate a comprehensive deal from start to finish. Quite remarkable. And the best example of an ultra-modern trade deal. It's got everything. It's got services, it's got innovation, it's got mobility, it's got IP. It's a whole lot in there. It's a great template. And of course, we've now got the New Zealand deal coming up very soon. We've got the New Zealand High Commissioner here, and I'm hoping that will be round the corner. And there's similarities between the two deals. It's the scale of trade is slightly different, but the principles are the same. And one of the things is movement of people. So we have, with Australia, if you correct me, George, it's 3 years movement of 18 to 35-year-olds. It used to be 2 years, it's going to be 3 years.
It actually used to be 1 year with the opportunity on condition to increase to 2 years. And you'll be pleased to know that the definition of youth has been increased from 30 to 35.
Fantastic, there we go. So 18 to 35, 3 years. And I hope that the New Zealand deal will also have exactly the same 1835, 3 years. And just before I conclude, the FTA with India, the negotiations have now started. I think this year, 2021, is a new era in the Indo-British partnership. This is the beginning of a new era. The CPTPP, put this into perspective, 110 billion pounds of trade, 11 countries. China, one country, is 100 billion pounds of trade. America, we may not have a free trade deal with America. It is still our #1 trading partner and will continue to be so. And finally, on the point that George made about the security, just look at the alignment we now have with Australia. You've got the Five Eyes, you've got AUKUS, you've got the FTA, and then you have the CPTPP as well down the line. Wow! I mean, that is just a seamless thread all the way from London through to Australia. So there we are. And final point, I mustn't miss this. CBI, seize the moment, our strategy, economic strategy for the UK over the next decade. £700 billion worth of opportunity we've identified. A lot of help from McKinsey as well. I'm very grateful to them. Global Britain is a big part of that. And exports, SME exports. Now, let me just give you one statistic. 14% of UK exporters are superstar exporters. Those are companies that export 10 or more products to 10 or more markets, compared with 0%, 40% in Germany. So we've got to do much more to promote exports, SME exports. Export guarantees, for example, are fantastic. So lots to go for. I'm very optimistic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of our panellists. I'm going to ask a few questions from the floor. I'm very keen, you won't be surprised to hear this because we're the Institute of Economic Affairs, to really focus on the trade benefits, also because I serve on the Strategic Trade Advisory Group of the DIT. I think it's one of the key messages that we need to get across, actually. We often, people on this panel, I dare say people in this room, take it as given what the benefits of trade are, but it perhaps hasn't filtered down to the public or even the media as much as we'd like. Shanker, I want to start with you. You were mentioning, and I nearly interjected in your remarks, you know, we, the UK, have a great chance with India. Why do you think that is? What places us in such a unique position? And B, do you think that there is the chance of a full-blown trade deal, or is this going to be, you know, 1,000 cuts to get there? Lots of small incremental arrangements rather than one sort of full-blown deal that we've been able to do with Australia.
Well, I think, the High Commissioner talked about the alignment of nations in terms of the US, Australia, and the UK. We don't necessarily have the same degree of alignment with India on all of those issues. But I would say the reason I think that a deal is possible for the UK with India is in order to get a trade deal to move quickly, you need to have very focused offensive interests and not very much defensive baggage. And so the answer to your question, Mark, is it depends on that defensive baggage point. So what does India want? I think it'd be fair to say that India certainly prioritises what I talked about, mode 4 services, movement of workers. That is going to be a big interest of India. They're also very interested in the agricultural reform. And many countries, not just India, but throughout the world, have looked at the UK coming out of the EU with the EU's, massive agricultural baggage in terms of not only tariff restrictions but also SPS restrictions. You've got 33 developing countries, filing cases against European SPS rules. The EU has managed to unite the world, Canada, India, Australia, Latin America, against their SPS rules. Now, if the UK aligns to those rules, then you will have a lot of defensive baggage and you won't be able to do any of these deals. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you are going to be more open, then you open up the possibility of doing those deals. So it kind of depends. And I think it's still not entirely clear where the UK is going to land on that. But I think the India deal will determine, the ability to present that kind of face. And then, we do have, as Lord Bilimoria mentioned, we have very specific offensive interests in legal services, certain financial services, and the Scotch whisky issues that they know need to be solved. And so you can see a deal dynamic taking shape, and that's how trade deals get done.
George, can I come to you? You spoke very highly of Liz Truss. She's also a very good friend of the Institute of Economic Affairs, so we often speak very highly of her as well. But I guess an unsympathetic observer might say that however great it is that we, basically concluded the Australia deal, we've plucked all of the low-hanging fruit. Quite a lot of the trade deals we did were successful rollovers of the EU's arrangements. How for the UK, how much tougher do you think the going gets once we've, done what, a vast amount of work done in, as Lord Bilimoria said, in an unbelievably short period of time, but nevertheless, on the face of it, one of the easier propositions. Do you think Britain's new free trade approach potentially runs out of road once we plucked the low-hanging fruit, or am I being too pessimistic?
No, I think you're being too pessimistic. And of course, every deal is different. And I mean, one of the canards in this debate has been, for those who resisted even the Australian deal, was that, well, it will create precedent that we'll be bound to follow and that will restrict us in future. That just isn't so. The rollover deals are rollover deals. There's not much to say about them. The Australia deal, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, Bede, when I say I expect the New Zealand deal too, are beyond the rollover deals the most obvious deals that the United Kingdom can do because of all of the commonalities and commonalities of interest and outlook that I don't need to recite. When I was campaigning for this deal, particularly among the Tory backbench, the line that always got a head nod and was indisputable was whenever I ran into a recalcitrant protectionist, of whom a few still lurk around the place, I said, look, if you can't do a deal with Australia, who are you going to do a deal with? And nobody could gainsay that proposition. And I think, Bede, you can have that line now too, because it's kind of applies to New Zealand as well. So I think up to a point, you're right, Mark, that Australia and New Zealand are the kind of next most obvious cabs off the rank. But that said, the benefits of a global trading footprint for a country like this are so clear that even if other deals may not be quite as crystalline or pure, as the Australian deal looks as if it will be, nevertheless the benefits will be enormous. And I forget who it was who said a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. But you don't want to define failure in another trade deal as being not as crystalline as the Australian trade deal. And I know Liz used to say, well, it's the gold standard deal. Well, it is, but nevertheless, a good deal is a good deal.
A silver standard deal with somebody else might still be worth having. You're saying,
Well, look, each deal, each negotiation is different, but I think also you build the intellectual case too. I mean, one thing that really astonished me when I came to be the High Commissioner here is how you had to make the case for free trade all the time. And I know you do this at the IEA, and God bless you, but I mean, the argument for free trade in this country is not yet won. In Australia, the argument for free trade was won in the late 20th century and even more so in more recent years, so that today in Australia, with the exception of some dinosaur trade unionist or some communist academic, you will not find anybody who will argue against free trade, because it is so manifestly been to Australia's economic benefit since we began doing free trade agreements initially with New Zealand, in fact, as long ago as 1983.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a very fair point. I mean, I think you could say that the argument in the UK was won in the early part of the 20th century, but there's been a heck of a lot of backsliding since. A lot of backsliding since. Aniskha, let me come to you. You mentioned these numbers, and you could almost, like those in the room who didn't know them, about the tariff on Scotch whisky and the rest of it, of 150%. I mean, it's amazing that you're able to do any business at all. But what steps can companies like Pernod and others take to actually change this sort of debate? These barriers are serious impediments to the growth of business and employment in the United Kingdom, right? But I rather take George's point. I think that the arguments for and against free trade in the public domain are now somewhat more in the balance. What do you think we need to do to get the benefits and the present downsides of protectionism over to the British public better than we've done to date?
I think bringing it to the public awareness in a more cogent form than some of the rhetoric we've seen is a useful start. I think, we've obviously as a business drunk from the Kool-Aid of free trade. It's fundamental to what we do. 98% of everything we produce by volume is exported overseas, and that supports the government's agenda and things like levelling up. If you look, 1,600 of our staff are in Scotland, 5 billion of exports. The UK's largest food and drink exports is Scotch whisky coming from Scotland. That not only generates export revenue, it's located in rural locations, it also brings in tourism from overseas. So really important to the broader agenda that people see those connections and also how it filters down through the supply chain. I heard Anne-Marie Trevelyan yesterday talk about the maltsters in her electorate. There's also the logistics providers, the bankers, the service providers. So we all understand how integrated it is and fundamental to our way of operating. The other thing I say about India, tariff actually used to be 400%. Right. So by some measures we are better off, but clearly at the moment it's the largest whisky market in the world. We have penetration of less than 2% of Scotch whisky. The SWA, Scotch Whisky Association, estimates that with fair market value, we would get up to 5%, which is still not going to overwhelm the Indian market by any stretch, but will create more jobs, more employment back home in the UK. So I think there's a real opportunity to explain better how this filters down and affects people on a day-to-day basis rather than it being some esoteric academic debate.
I don't want to be too downcast, Lord Bilimoria, but sometimes in our efforts at the IEA to promote free trade, we'll come across businesses, lobby groups, I'm not blaming the CBI for this, I should hasten to add, who will immediately agree that they're in favour of free trade in general. But as soon as you get to the specifics, there are 101 problems as to why this particular deal or without this particular protection will have all of these adverse consequences. What's your take on whether the case in civil society and in the business community really has been won or can be won for free trade as a principle?
I think it's indisputable that trade is good. And the freer trade is, the better it is for everyone involved in that. And by the way, when it's trade, it's not just trade. We need to look at trade and investment. If I give you some statistics about India, there are almost 1,000 Indian companies in the UK with combined revenues of over £50 billion. If you look at, they employ over 100,000 people. If you look at the other way around, in India, there are over almost 600 companies employing 1 million people directly and indirectly. And wait for this, their growth rate, even last year, 26%. Yeah. Some of them were growing at 100% a year. So the investment side is very important as well. And I just want to acknowledge, when in the early days when I founded the UK India Business Council, Gerard Lyons, who's over here, was chief economist at Standard Chartered, went on then to be Boris Johnson's chief economist as Mayor of London. And the statistics in those days, and if you compare with now, even without a free trade deal with India, how far we've come. And I just want to not underestimate what Liz Truss and the DIT achieved in rolling over those deals. We didn't have a Department of International Trade until 5 years ago. We were told, and I'll put my hand up, I thought logically, are we going to be able to roll over these deals with 500 million people, biggest trading bloc in the world, and get the same terms bilaterally with those 66 countries? And we did. Some of them were not easy, and the CBI, by the way, helped to roll over some of those before the deadline. We managed to do all of them, and I think it's fantastic. I think the opportunity now is to make them bespoke. Is each one of these deals, a Canadian, for example, we can enhance those so they're even more beneficial to us. And the benefits of a trade deal, I mean, the Australian one, if you say, oh, it's only going to be 0.02% benefit to the UK's GDP, well, it's a lot. And if you add up all the different trade deals you're going to do, the effect on the GDP is huge. The effect on consumers benefiting, businesses benefiting, the economy benefiting as well. And then the other point to make is we have a big job to do. Once the Australian deal is finalised, the New Zealand deal thereafter, all these deals that have been rolled over, we've got to get businesses to actually use these deals, to know about the benefit of them. There's a big job to be done there, and the CBI, I think, and other organisations have to do that.
It's very interesting on the benefits of trade deals. I know Shanker's had a lot of thoughts on this. And I should say, sorry, I'll come over to the audience now, so if you've got a question, do put your hand in the air. It does seem to me the only area of government policy where official government statistics tend to underestimate the impact of their efforts. In fact, once the trade deals come through, they tend, it's not a hard science, to actually be enormously more beneficial than the initial numbers. And a cynic like me might say that for many government activities, it's exactly the other way around. You're promised the moon, and what actually is delivered is it falls somewhat short. So let me come to the audience for questions.
Can I make a very quick remark about that? Those statistics about the people who criticise free trade deals quote as saying, oh, the volume of trade is only X, are so misleading for two very obvious reasons. First of all, they're a static figure. Mm-hmm. The whole point of a free trade deal is to facilitate and elevate the level of trade. And secondly, they're statistics based on a pre-free trade agreement environment anyway. So with all the free trade agreements Australia has done particularly in the last decade and a half, a decade or 5 years on, every single one of them, the volume of commerce, the volume of trade under those deals has been vastly greater than the static figure that was quoted at the entry into force.
Yeah, very right. We've got a forest of hands. Listen, I'll start on this side of the room. If you can wait till the microphone gets to you. Who's holding the mic over there? Kieran at the back. Can we... Oh, Chandela, hi. If you can introduce yourself, and then we'll take this gentleman here and that gentleman there. Please, if it's going to be a speech, make sure it's only a sentence long, and make sure it finishes with a question mark.
Noted, Mark. Thank you very much to the comments panel.
Can you introduce yourself?
Chandela. My two points, really. In terms of the Australia, US and UK deal, was there a place, or should India have been consulted? Strangely enough. And secondly, on supply chain resilience, COVID demonstrated that we were all too much in bed with China in any way conceivable. What are your thoughts as a panel in terms of shifting that?
Okay, and then a couple of rows behind you. The gentleman in the glasses there. Again, if you could introduce yourself.
Thanks very much. Conrad Landin from New Internationalist magazine. Given the rising tensions between the US and Australia on the one hand and China on the other have been a factor in the shortage in silicon chips that's currently going on. Should businesses be worried by the potential of AUKUS creating rising military tensions in the South China Sea?
And then, gentleman right at the back again, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks. Paul Marchant, CFO at RSSB. Just a quick question on just what we were talking about there. George, you mentioned you can't believe that people can't see the advantages of free trade. Is there a responsibility of the media to report this in a positive way? Because they always seem to come at it from an angle of a zero-sum gain. Someone's going to lose out, protectionism. I get the role of the politicians, but is there something around the media and not just relying on the IEA to push that out?
Okay, thanks very much. Let me start with Lord Bilimoria. Pick up any of those threads that you wish to, and I'll just move along the panel. So to remind you, should there have been consultation with India? What have we learned about supply-side resilience? Rising tensions, particularly US and China, causing problems? And what more can the media do to get these stories out? I mean, it always seems to be, anything about agriculture always seems to be how it might harm British farmers, and that maybe it would, but there are more people who eat food in Britain than produce food in Britain, and the people who eat food don't often seem to get much of a look in these stories. My lord.
Again, with the supply chain issues, we have got the world advancing to such a stage where, for a variety of reasons, we work on a just-in-time basis. And then we're not ready for when things are not just in time. And I think the lessons that I've learned here is not as simple as reshoring. In fact, you've got to promote trade even more. You've got to have cooperation even more to have resilient supply chains, is my answer, rather than reshoring as the answer, because then everyone's going to go back into their... Can you imagine the future if everyone reshores? I think what we've come to with a more integrated, interdependent, phenomenal communication world is the advantage of trade that we're seeing and what we're talking about with FTAs. With the media, I think perceptions are so important. And when you've got impressions about India, now people are waking up to India as an emerging economic superpower. Travel has a big part to play. I just took part in a transport panel. We've got to have that ease of travel and ease of communication when people go and see for themselves. Mobility of people. The diaspora of countries. If you look at the Indian diaspora over here, 1.5 million people of Indian origin that live in the UK are a living bridge between India and the UK. The travel between the two countries, millions of people every year. This is hugely important, and you could apply this to every country. And the Indian diaspora, by the way, 30 million around the world now. And I'm going to boast, they're now reaching the very top in every country in the world.
Cheers to that.
Okay.
Aniskha.
Thanks. I think I have to start with a plug for the Kiwi diaspora, who are not doing too badly either. I think I'll take the supply chain. Well, you'll be pleased to hear that Scotch whisky is a product of geographic origin, so not likely to go anywhere in the near future. But I do think that the recent supply chain crises have given all businesses time to pause for thought and reconsider their ordering and their timeframes. We recognise there are some unique global circumstances that have been exacerbated by COVID and also increasing demand in places like Asia and America that have diverted containers from port. But nevertheless, it has made, at the highest level of the boardroom, it's raised our cognizance of the fact that we need to focus on this and take this into our business planning. And in the short run, we also welcome the flexibilities that the government can use, perhaps through the points-based immigration system, to address some of the immediate crises that we're seeing in the logistics system.
George.
Should India have been consulted? Look, the AUKUS, although a broader framework for cooperation, was initially about submarines, and there were particular reasons why the United States and the United Kingdom were Australia's natural partners in that deal. It's very important to know that one of the most dynamic and increasingly close relationships that Australia has is with India. And the framework of cooperation between India and Australia, really since the time of the election of Mr. Abbott's government in 2013, has been one of the great themes of Australian foreign policy, and the revival of the Quad, the quadrilateral dialogue between Australia, India, Japan and the United States is a very important element of that. So there is no lack of embrace, shall we say, and greater closeness between Australia and India, and as you've heard from Lord Bilimoria, certainly between the United Kingdom and India. On your question, sir, I don't blame the media. Not all the media, by the way, are as 20th century, shall we say, as you would characterise them. Certainly, the Murdoch press in this country was very supportive of the free trade agreement. I think it's all opinion leaders, but particularly opinion leaders with, who've got the insight to see the way, what the future holds, need to make this case. And if it needs opinion leaders, whether political leaders, primarily business leaders, academic commentators, media commentators, whoever, then all should make the case, and in the babel of all those voices, hopefully the wisdom of a more liberal economic policy and trade policy will emerge.
Shanker, your thoughts very briefly. I want to get one more round of questions in. I'm conscious we're on the clock.
Yeah, so just on the supply chain question, and obviously China is the sort of elephant in the room of every trade policy discussion, even if it's not mentioned. And a lot of what we discussed is designed to contain Chinese market distortions around the world and their effect. That is not to say we don't want to trade with China. It's not to say that China is an incredibly important market for everyone. But the reality is that there are significant trade barriers, distortions, IP violations, etc. There that need to be dealt with in a rational and realistic way. And the countries that have come together, particularly the Australians, the UK and the US, I think understand that. I'm not so sure to the question about India that India and other countries really understand that reality to the extent that they can work together in a very effective way. That being said, there is the Quad, Japan, India, Australia, and the US for that region, and it's important we build on that. That's why I said it's important to get the Japanese to come into this on a trade policy perspective as well. So we do have to be realistic and pragmatic. China is also not monolithic. There are people in China who understand that the network of protections for their state-owned enterprises and their distortions are in fact holding up their economy. There aren't many of those people at the moment. There were more of them a few years ago. But I think it's important that in our discussions with and around China that we make that case.
Okay. I want to bring in, I'm going to have three more questions here. So the two gentlemen on the front row here and then the gentleman here in the grey shirt. That's all we've got. If you can keep your questions brief, and I'll ask the panellists to do likewise. We have 7 minutes remaining. If you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Michael from Gravesham, and I'm interested in free trade because it opens up opportunities for people like me with disabilities. But Mark, just something you said once on Panorama when Port Talbot was closing. Do you think free trade could be sold better if we were able to offer people that were about to be made redundant chances to retrain?
Okay, there's a question to the chair, but I'll ask the panellists to answer it. So.
Good afternoon. I'm Jess Sancy from Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce. Birmingham will be hosting the Commonwealth Games next year, and can I encourage the Australian and the New Zealand High Commissioner sitting here next to me to reach out collectively to India during the Festival of Sport? India consumes more whisky than the rest of the world combined, and it represents 25% of the UK's food and drink exports. So the opportunities with a trade deal and a tariff reduction from 150% is just immense. You'd be very welcome to see you next year.
And then here on the side, thank you.
Hi, my name's Emilio. I'm a reporter for Politico. I've got a question for the High Commissioner. A couple of questions. Are we expecting any announcements around the COP26 event with respect to UK-Australia partnership on trade and sustainability? And also, New Zealand's putting together this agreement on climate change, trade and sustainability. Is there any thinking in Australia about joining potentially?
Okay. Thank you for your questions. Shanker, I'll start with you to answer any of those and any concluding thoughts or remarks. We've got about 1 minute each, and then I'll move down the panel and finish with Lord Bilimoria.
So with respect to steel and Port Talbot, I think it is very important if you're trying to sell the benefits of free trade that you also incorporate in that message the importance of dealing with behind-the-border barriers and market distortions as well. And the reality of steel is, while it is the steel industries around the world are always very good at asking for protection and tariffs generally. Where I do have some sympathy for them is that the steel market has been massively distorted, largely by, but not only, by China SOEs. There's a whole OECD dialogue on this. And the ability to link your trade policy into your market distortion agenda is going to be, I think, critical. And then one point I wanted to make about modelling. Our economic models that are used by Treasury to identify the benefits of free trade deals are, I mean, people on the panel have discussed how inadequate they are because they're static and so on, but they don't deal with the biggest area of new trade agreements, which are things like the recognition of professional qualifications. They don't deal with standards policy. They don't deal with data. They don't deal with any of these things, which are actually notoriously difficult to deal with. And in fact, the ITC reported on the TPP that while we know how to identify the benefits of tariff reduction, we're very bad at identifying the benefits of regulatory improvements. And that's why treasuries always underestimate the benefits of trade deals. And I've been quite critical of China. Let me be positive about China. The New Zealand-China trade deal was underestimated. The impact of it was underestimated by a factor of 11. A factor of 11. And this is always done with trade deals. Yep. And that's not even to include the fact that it changes the way people think. It's not always just about the numbers. Sometimes it's about the way entrepreneurs think of markets, and that can have a huge impact. So I'll just wanted to make that point.
To the gentleman in the grey shirt, on Australia-UK cooperation ahead of COP26, can I remind you that on the 29th of July, Australia and the United Kingdom signed a low-emissions technology partnership to partner in developing low-emissions technologies. Between now and COP26, Australia will be publishing its long-term emissions reduction strategy. And to the gentleman from Birmingham, I'm paying an official visit to Birmingham next month.
Very good. Aniskha.
Yeah, just to pass on my thanks to the gentleman from Birmingham for advancing our arguments as well as I could. Thank you very much for that. And to note on the point about human capital and training, that's very important, not just in terms of mobility, but in terms of investing in our people and also raising the diversity of our representation of the workforce, both in terms of gender balance, but ethnicity, age, disability. That's what any good corporate should be doing.
And finally, my lord.
Thank you. I'm so glad you brought up the Commonwealth Games because the University of Birmingham, where I'm proud to be Chancellor, is going to be at the heart of it. The Olympic Commonwealth Village is going to be predominantly the university. We're going to host squash, we're going to host hockey, and I'm really looking forward to it. And this brings me to the point that this is much more than trade, because what is trade? It is bringing countries together. It's about partnership. And it's about what the High Commissioner was talking about trade and security going hand in hand. The more interchange we have with our trading partners, such as India, such as Australia, New Zealand, with exercises, armed forces exercises, exchange of our officers and cadets at the Royal College of Defence Studies, at Staff College, the more we have, the better. Students, international students, I mean, one of the roles I've head of the international students in the country, they're going up to 600,000. The bridges that are built, the lifelong, generation-long links. And the next thing is collaborative research. Cross-border collaborative research is a multiple of field-weighted impact compared with doing research on your own. So this is all linked to trade. It's bringing countries together, and it's enhancing to the benefit of both parties.
Thank you very much. Let me just make a few remarks before thanking everybody and wrapping up. To your point about Port Talbot, I mean, the great challenge, I think, for those of us who put the free trade argument is that the losses from opening up trade might be small, but they're very concentrated. And the benefits from opening up trade might be colossal, but are often dispersed. And that makes it much harder to sort of win that argument. Concentrated losses tends to focus people's minds. Big but dispersed advantages doesn't tend to. Shanker, I was fascinated you mentioned that trade deal underestimated by a factor of 11. I was looking through a few and I thought typically the economic impact of trade deals was underestimated by about a factor of 10 on average. My recommendation to the Department for International Trade was therefore to take whatever their initial number was and to multiply it by 10. It was pointed out this wasn't the most sophisticated piece of economic modelling that had ever come out of the IEA, but I was hoping to edge them in that direction. Listen, it's been a...
Just move the decimal point one place.
Yeah, just move the decimal point. Very, very simple. Very, very simple. Listen, thanks to all of you in the audience for contributing. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of you. Thanks to those who are watching at a later date on YouTube as well. We'll make sure that we link to some of the documents we've referred to in the show notes below. My thanks again to Pernod Ricard for making this event possible. But my biggest thanks to our 4 superb panellists. Please show your appreciation for Lord Bilimoria, Aniskha, Your Excellency and Shanker Singham. Thanks very much indeed. Well, if you enjoyed that conversation, why not watch one of these other videos? And while you're here, remember to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss out on a single IEA broadcast.